Next, from Chicago, talk radio show host and former Republican gubernatorial candidate Dan Proft gives a speech at the City Club of Chicago titled "The State of Illinois Politics," in which he lays out how the state is headed for inevitable financial ruin unless state politicians begin to honestly discuss Illinois' finances with their constituents and take action. This runs about 40 minutes.
I appreciate Chris leaving me some time for my remarks. It's a pleasure to be at the City Club. It's an honor, really, and since my first invite may be my last, depending on how what I have to say is received, I just wanted to see if I could be remembered for at least getting unanimity on one thing I had to offer, and that is to congratulate Jay Doherty and his wife Colleen, who were honored over the weekend by the Best Buddies organization, which is another organization, one of many great ones that we have in Chicago, that serves the developmental and intellectual disability community. And as Chris referenced, I have the honor of serving on the board of Envision Unlimited. I'm going to be speaking in my remarks to the issue of how we treat persons with disabilities in this state. Secondly, I understand that it was the City Club where Donald Trump gave his first speech after his announcement of his candidacy for presidency of the United States. So my hope, of course, is that this provides a similar springboard for me, and that would be, of course, for a reality TV show, which is what I really want. For my stem winder today, I was going to distill Illinois' kleptocratic political culture and explain all the Ponzi schemes that prop it up for now. I was going to kind of try and diagnose this folie douce that we suffer from in Illinois. Actually, it's more like folie 13 million, but I don't know what 13 million is in French. The shared psychosis that we have, this political culture that we tolerate. But it feels to me, as I'm writing this and kind of pulling out all of the data with respect to the pension systems and the Medicaid system and K through 12 education and so on, I was starting to get bored myself. It seems to me it'd just be selling past the close to go through all that in a state where 85% of Illinois families say we're on the wrong track, and half want to leave, perhaps the worst indictment of Illinois. So this is not going to be completely another jury speech delineating the statistics that punctuate Chicago's place as the worst governed major city in America in the worst governed state in United States history. It's not going to be that. It's clear that Chicagoans and many Illinoisans are unmoved by data, so why belabor it? So if you think we can have public sector employees pay $140,000 into the pension system and get guaranteed $2 million back, and prop up that thing election cycle after election cycle by borrowing in the bond markets at Sopranos rates, then this speech is for you. If you think $250 billion in debt, featuring the largest unfunded pension liabilities in the country with another $16 billion in unpaid bills, all while Illinoisans pay the highest state and local tax burden in the nation, if you think what I'm describing is a revenue problem, not a spending problem, then this speech is for you. If you think we don't spend enough money on K through 12 education in Illinois, despite a 48% overall increase in spend and a 59% increase in state spend over the past 20 years, while K through 12 enrollment has grown only 5% during that same time period, then this speech is for you. By the way, the numbers for CPS, 20% real dollar increase over the same 20 years, 5% decline in enrollment. If you think the problem with higher ed is the lack of state funding, despite the fact that Illinois provides twice the national average in per pupil higher ed support to its state colleges and universities, who then turn around and charge families 25 to 50% higher than their conference peers in neighboring states. If you think that's the problem, the lack of funding, then this speech is for you. If you think 32 years of the last 34 of Mike Madigan's speakership is not a sufficient probationary period Let's give the guy a chance to do something. Or 100 years of Democrat dominance of the city of Chicago, then this speech is for you. And by the way, that is hardly a defense of the Illinois Republican Party. The reason I would argue that Madigan has enjoyed his run is not because he's genius. It's because the Illinois Republican Party is feckless and weak and cowardly and surrenders as its first offering on most issues. And if you think stories reported and the sacred cows protected by a Chicago Springfield press corps that votes 90% Democrat for 30 years wouldn't be any different if the same Chicago Springfield press corps was comprised of 90% Republican primary voters, then this speech is for you. The math is only an opinion crowd is my mission field. Those who care only about inputs to the exclusion of outputs are who I want to reach. If you nod your head when the political ruling class gives you their three-pronged defense for everything that's wrong with Illinois, it's not as bad as you think. Plenty of blame to go around, and we're working on it. If you nod your head at that, say that makes sense, then we need to talk. If you enjoy engorging yourself on boilerplate kindergarten talk from the rushing nesting doll that is Rauner Rom, pop open Rauner and out pirouettes Rom, same person, then I want your attention. So my challenge is simple, actually. The title of this speech is The State of Illinois Politics. What's politics about? People. So the real question is the state of we the people here in Illinois. What is that state? And I boil it down to two simple questions. Are we reasonable? Are we reasonable people in Illinois? And are we kind people? Those two questions actually turn out to be connected. It's really one question. Because as Chesterton observed, those who have given in to unreason are ready for unkindness. And I would suggest that we have become a particularly unkind state, a barbaric state, to put a fine point on it. And I want to share three examples of things that we could do that are about the people of this state, not it's about people only as the mechanism for a discussion of statistics. So let's return to the issue of persons with developmental disabilities in Illinois. So every politician in both parties says, I'm going to Springfield, I'm going to city council, I'm going to county board to make sure that people who need state services, local services through no fault of their own, are provided those state services because that's what a civilized society does. And everybody agrees. And we have, as I mentioned, $250 billion in debt and the highest state and local tax burden in the nation. So how is it that up until recently we were 51st out of 50 behind even the District of Columbia in providing services to persons with developmental and intellectual disabilities? Of the $16 billion in unpaid bills, many of those unpaid bills or unpaid monies are owed to social service providers. So how is that? Square that circle for me. On the one hand, this is what I'm going to government to do. On the other hand, we're the worst in the nation in doing it. How is that possible? You see the incongruence there? So there's something that explains it quite nicely. The political ruling class in the state is lying to us. They're lying. They are not doing with our monies what we would like them to do and what they say they intend to do. Plain and simple, black and white. It is unimpeachable. 24,000 Illinois families are on the PUNS list. PUNS list, for those not familiar with the sector, prioritization of urgency of needs for services. Prioritization of urgency for need of services, 24,000 people long. You are having families whose child with a developmental or intellectual disability actually age out of eligibility for services while waiting for those services. That's a fact. And we talk a lot in this state about businesses leaving for more hospitable business climates, and that's happening, of course. People leaving for a better quality of life at a lower cost of living, that's happening, of course. Well, people are leaving this state to go to states that keep their promises to families who have a family member with a developmental disability. That's a fact, too. And I know families, many families, who've done that, to Wisconsin, to Indiana. We've taken the unreasonable position that we can make promises that go unfulfilled, and we will not hold our elected officials accountable for those cheap promises, those lies, and so we become unkind. The things that you say you want to see happen are not happening in unbelievable numbers. What happened with the Obamacare Medicaid expansion? That was an opportunity for more people to access Medicaid who need it, right? Well, what's actually happened? You run a Medicaid system you cannot finance, which was the case prior to Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. So Medicaid providers who aren't getting paid stop accepting Medicaid patients. So the very people that were intended to be served by the Medicaid program 45, 50 years ago when it was conceived, pregnant women, indigent children, the developmentally disabled, they actually see their access to quality service worsen because we run a program we can't finance. So where's the honor in that? Maybe one or more of the parties and the candidates and the legislators who make these promises, and some are genuine about it and some put in the fight, but it's few. Maybe instead of only always talking about being number one in the country in job creation or capital formation or business location, we should be having a conversation about us keeping our promises to ourselves and to families who are our neighbors who have children with challenges. Maybe we should focus on being number one in the country and providing services that are a mirror of our humanity. Because I don't like what I see when I look in the mirror in this state. Second issue, keeping families together. Keeping families together. We're supposed to respect people who decide to build a life for themselves and their families in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in this state. Are we doing that? Obviously, some of the statistics that I said I'm not going to talk about, it's kind of that little trick saying I'm not going to call my opponent a horse thief, right? And then you've already called him a horse thief. So that was my little trick in case you didn't pick up on it. But are we really doing that? Are we keeping families together? Obviously, with the cost of higher education in this state relative to conference peers for in-state tuition for families in state, we're driving our best and brightest out of the state at record numbers. In fact, only New Jersey exports more of its college-bound high school seniors than Illinois. So that's not good. By the way, also leading the exodus out of Illinois, postgraduate exodus out of Illinois, since we're leading the nation in that too, last 6 years. It's not seniors, it's not retirees who want to go to Arizona or Florida. Millennials. Millennials as a cohort is leading the exodus from this state. Brain drain. It's a problem. The other problem is that the biggest investment middle-income families make in their lives, their homes, it is not possible to get a rate of return, to get any real return on your home, because property taxes are confiscatory in this state. Highest property taxes in the nation. This is not just a financial problem, it's a moral problem. You know where the highest property tax rate as a percentage of home value is in Cook County? So Harvey, Robbins, very warm, people who know the property tax system. Fort Heights. Fort Heights. One of the poorest communities in Cook County, one of the poorest communities in Illinois, one of the poorest communities in the country. The average property tax rate in the country as a percentage of home value is 0.9%. In Illinois, it's 2.5 times that, it's 2.3%. In Fort Heights, 10%. Precluding home ownership. Precluding home ownership. You cannot even get on that first rung up the ladder. And for middle-income families, Aurora, Illinois versus Aurora, Colorado. Both working class, middle income type communities. 2 homes sold at the end of March, one in Aurora, Illinois, one in Aurora, Colorado. 5-bedroom house in Aurora, Illinois, sold for about $250,000, tax bill $8,400. 4-bedroom home sold in Aurora, Colorado for $250,000, tax bill $840. This state is becoming a home equity desert, and it's forcing people, particularly those on fixed incomes, to leave. It is breaking up families. It's forcing, if your kids do stay and go to school here, it's forcing mom and dad to leave because they can't afford it. We have an idea that I've proposed, and we're pushing an advisory ballot question to try and get on the 2018 ballot to change the way we do property taxation in Illinois because, as I said, it's immoral. And it's also destructive. And that would be to adopt the Indiana property tax system. You know, sometimes the great thing is, if you pick your head up and you look around to see what everybody else is doing, you might find somebody that's doing something successfully that you want to replicate rather than just perpetuating the failure that you've got tunnel vision. So Indiana's system, 1% hard cap on property taxes as a percentage of home value, residential, and then 2% farmland, 3% commercial. 1% hard cap. And that would reduce the median home owners' property tax bill, obviously, by 60% overnight. I mean, in the suburbs, in the collar counties, you're talking about numbers that are between 3.5% to 5.5% of home value. It would restore home equity. Here's the other thing that's nice about that. Oh, by the way, I should mention, too, Indiana, and this is, check this out, I swear this is true. In Indiana, because I know what the concerns are going to be about reducing property taxes, but check this out. And some of you have probably been there, so maybe you could back me up on this. In Indiana, they have schools. They have police departments, they have fire departments, they have local units of government. I swear to God that's true.
Prove it.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And of course, and one of the arguments I get to this is, well, also in Indiana, they have this unique thing where local counties can impose an income tax. Municipalities can impose. Okay, fine. Your overall tax burden is still a fraction in Indiana, no matter where you go, as compared to Cook and the Collars. So that's the point, isn't it? The net plus the possibility of the return, a return on the largest investment you're going to make in your lives. Most people. And here's the thing, it also has a daisy chain effect to do what is required on the political class, put handcuffs on people. I mean, not the handcuffs we're used to with people being taken away. I'm talking about spending restraint. It forces a discipline at the local level that then can be leveraged to force a discipline at the state level. So for example, if you can't destroy people's home equity to pay for ever escalating administrative salaries and an expansion of your local school district, then the state has to live up to its constitutional responsibility to be the primary funder of K through 12 education, which would require it to get out of all kinds of businesses that it's in that it's shown no proficiency in operating. And that would be a good thing. Put handcuffs on local officials by capping property taxes as a percentage of home value, and force the state to abide its constitutional responsibility to be the primary funder of K through 12 education. It also has an equalizing effect. So it's kind of a nice little daisy chain development if we would pursue this. By the way, that must be why it's working so well for Indiana. I mentioned the school spend numbers and how they've gone up at a 45-degree angle while performance has been flat, but I didn't mention the performance, but we just heard it this week. Fewer than 40% of K through 12 third and eighth graders pass the math or reading PARCC tests. So it's not just a Chicago problem. Chicago is actually under 25%. So it definitely includes a Chicago problem. That is the biggest problem, but it's not limited to Chicago. The last thing, and this is an idea that should give us hope because it actually came to pass. It is the greatest paradigm shift, the greatest system change idea that has taken effect into law in my 25 years in Illinois politics. Now, that's admittedly a low bar, but it's an important development nonetheless. And that is the tax credit scholarships that were passed and signed into law. Bipartisan support. I know that's very popular. As long as something's bipartisan, it must be good. Usually not. In this case, yes. Tax credit scholarships that provide people the opportunity to fund $500 million worth of scholarships over the next 5 years for low to middle income children to have the same educational opportunities as the wealthy and the politically connected in this city and this state. That is a game changer. And by the way, one of the people who is most responsible for this is in the audience, Miles Mendoza, right there. We should give him a round of applause. In Florida, where they've had this same setup, the nuances are a bit different, but it's the same idea, where they've had this in place for the last 15 plus years. 100,000 kids are now in the program. You know what the median household income is of the kids getting scholarships to these schools? 27 grand. And there's a study that just came out, because we had one of the authors of the study on my radio show, showing how well those kids, I think it's 80% are minority, Black and Latino, are doing as compared to their public school counterparts. This is not an attack on public schools. I know everything, there's competition, or talk about anything financial, or anybody should go to any other school. This is an attack on public education, and you want to eliminate public education and all the other ridiculous hysteria from teachers' unions, for goodness sakes. It's none of that. It's to say K through 12 should be child-centered and outcome-based. And it's to say that people shouldn't be discriminated against based on their household income and their address, which is what we have been doing in Illinois and Chicago up until the point of this deal for tax credit scholarships. Up to $13,200 per kid per year. $26,400, you double that if your kid is special needs or gifted. It's a game changer. Introducing competition into a system that is moribund, that is not performing as we would want it to perform at exorbitant prices as per the spend versus park tests. So those are two areas that are aspirational, property taxes and how we serve persons with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and one that's actually come to pass on a landscape few would ever think it could come to pass in a state government dominated by public sector unions and Chicago Democrats, frankly. But it happened. It happened because all of the problems that afflict Chicago and Illinois are man-made problems. They didn't arrive here on spaceships. We did this to ourselves. So they're man-made solutions, or at least improvements that could be made. The question seems to me to be one of courage. C.S. Lewis, I like to bookend my speeches with Christian apologists. I started with Chesterton, I'll end with C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said, courage is the formation of every virtue at its testing point. In other words, if you don't have courage, it's impossible to possess any of the other virtues you say you have, because when you are pressed, you will fold. So do we have the courage to be reasonable? Or are we going to tolerate unreasonable systems that produce unkindness from us? Necessarily, it requires unkindness to enforce unreason. Do we have the courage to be reasonable? Do we have the courage to be kind? Are we going to say no more to the barbarism that has taken hold in our city and state? That, to me, is the state of Illinois politics, because it's the state of the people, and the question each one of you has to ask yourselves and pay it forward in this cycle and beyond. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thanks all for your questions. Please send them up. We've got people taking them, and we'd love to get them. This comes right out of your remarks from Jasmine Hauser, pre-submitted. It's claimed, Dan, that people are moving out of Illinois in record numbers. Is it not also the case that For every property tax owner who leaves, someone else moves in. Therefore, isn't it a zero net out migration? Please clarify.
Well, I mean, the net is we're losing population. I mean, Chicago has its lowest population since 1920. So, I mean, that says something about where we are at as a population. The whole kind of outmigration thing, I just want to put it in human terms rather than kind of getting into the fact that people leaving are making $20,000 more than the people coming in, and that's. Do you know how big a decision it is for somebody to move? To move for economic reasons? So my family's here, my friends are here, I generally like the kids' school, I like all the cultural offerings that Chicago has to offer, I like the clubs I'm in, and all, but we can't make it make sense to be here. That is a momentous decision. The fact that so many people are making it should be a real wake-up call. I mean, I know, people come and go and all that, but, the data bears out just how deleterious it is on our economy. I mean, you're talking about over the last 15 years, basically, we've lost $30 billion in GDP by people from people who've left. But it's even more than the money. Is we're losing good people. We're losing, as I mentioned before, our smartest people because they can't make it make sense to be here. And those are huge decisions, and it's a huge, huge indictment of our politics and our political culture and our political leadership in both parties.
Kathy Carmody, is Kathy here? I think Kathy is, oh, there she is, oh, good. She's with the Institute of Public Policy for People with Disabilities and a member of the City Club. What can Illinois do, this comes right out of your remarks, to improve our poor national status on social service indicators? Is there a will or an interest in Springfield to make these improvements?
Well, I mean, the answer as we stand here today is no, there isn't. That could change. I mean, again, it put pressure. I mean, I understand that everybody's all giddy over Amazon HQ2, and that's all we can talk about. And that's great if it comes to Chicago or if it comes to Illinois. It's not going to, but if it does. But maybe making, how we treat those who need help among us as a priority when you talk to your state legislators or when you have these meetings of opinion leaders in the community. I mean, make this a priority, and it forces legislators to make it a priority. Here's the thing about the General Assembly, with a few exceptions, some of whom are in this room. The bad news is they're cowards. They join the parade after it's been formed. The good news is they're cowards. They can be pressured into doing things they otherwise wouldn't ordinarily do out of their own character or of their own volition. Milton Friedman said, the trick of politics is getting the wrong people to do the right thing. And the way you do that is by constantly, relentlessly applying pressure on issues that are important to you. So if we say these issues are important to you, then we should be applying pressure in that direction.
Fred O'Connor, City Club member, asks, what is the best realistic hope for school choice and educational improvement in Illinois?
Well, it's maxing out. We have $500 million ceiling over the next 5 years. It's making sure that we raise the $500 million and distribute those monies to kids that would then be availed of better educational opportunities. And then 5 years from now, when we're on the precipice of its sunsetting, you have a constituency built in, and we continue to apply pressure throughout that 5-year period to those same legislators I just talked about applying pressure to on the issue of serving the developmental disability community, so that this is extended into the future. I mean, again, the Florida case study, since this is a real-world case study, is so important. That program started out as a $25 million program. Now it's $600 million. And this is the biggest tax credit scholarship program of its kind, particularly at the outset, in our nation's history. This is a huge, huge thing that's been underreported for all kinds of obvious reasons. People don't want to take credit for it because Karen Lewis is going to get mad at them and all that jazz. But this is a huge development, paradigm changer. And we should be shouting it from the rooftops, and we should be encouraging families that have kids who could benefit from them, the scholarships to benefit from them, and people that have the resources to donate. So we take full advantage of this opportunity that a broad cross-section of coalition partners has created for us.
Dan, for folks watching and for folks here who don't follow it as closely, could you just go through the mechanics between individuals and the benefit and where the money goes and how it gets to benefit the kids?
Well, so right now, the process is setting up scholarship granting organizations, which are non-for-profits that will distribute the scholarships. This is what Florida has. So a lot of what Miles and his people are doing is modeled after Florida, which is good because it's been wildly successful. So again, replicating success. And so there'll be a period in the not too distant future where monies are raised and infrastructure is built where kids can start applying for scholarships for as soon as the next school year 2018. And then you'll have decisions made by these scholarship granting organizations consistent with the criteria that was established in the law. And again, remember the dollars. And also keep this in mind regarding the dollars, how we came to these numbers, because it speaks to how we fund K through 12 education in this state, which is we fund it well. $13,200 per individual, double it if it's special needs or gifted, 26.4. 13.2, you know where that came from? Median per pupil spend K through 12 education in Illinois. Big number. It's a lot bigger number than Bennett spent educating me, I'll tell you that.
Paul Metzger, member of the City Club, what specific significant cuts would you propose for the Illinois budget?
So there's a couple things. One is, if you're not talking about completely rethinking and reintroducing the 5 state pension systems, the Medicaid program, which is actually the largest line item in the general revenue fund, K through 12 education, and transportation infrastructure. If you're not completely rethinking how we do all of those things, how we finance them, the obligations they impose, then you're not serious about trying to climb our way out of $250 billion in debt or chart Illinois in a different course. So it's not just about cutting. Would I eliminate the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, or whatever Orwellian name it has right now, which is a pass-through for crony capitalism, corporate welfare? Yeah, gone. There's $1 billion. I mean, I could do this all day, but the problem is the Medicaid program, that $18 billion annual program that's moving from 1 in 5 Illinoisans eligible to 1 in 3. And of course, what politicians do, use entitlement programs to buy political fealty rather than to actually serve the constituency that was originally envisioned to be served. You have to rethink the state's Medicaid program. You have to reduce, you should roll back the Obamacare Medicaid expansion. You should. We couldn't afford it when it was 1 in 5. Now you're going to 1 in 3. The Kaiser Foundation, also redetermination of Medicaid rolls. If you're not eligible under the original strictures of the program, then you're off. I'm sorry, but if you live in Wisconsin, you can't be on Illinois' Medicaid program. If you're in this country illegally, I'm sorry, we will provide emergency services because that's what a humane society does, but you cannot access the state's Medicaid program. The Kaiser Foundation looked at this, and a redetermination of the state's Medicaid rolls would save between $500 and $750 million annually, just to give you another example. Obviously, the 5 state pension systems, huge, huge sucking chest wound. I mean, you cannot make these look, this is the thing, the pension system. The thing about the public sector unions, SEIU, AFSCME, and the teachers. The thing about them, tell your rank and file friends in AFSCME and SEIU and the teachers, I don't dislike them. In point of fact, people like me who are advocating for prospective pension reform, for benefits not yet earned, for work not yet performed, we're trying to save your pensions. Trying to save your pensions. We want you to get what was promised to you, even if it was a bad promise, because people relied on those promises, so it's the moral thing to do. But when you say, I have this provision in the state constitution, and Ann Burke said this is what it means, and so I'm going to put my fingers in my ears and not listen to anything you have to say, fine. But when these pension funds capsize, and they are going to capsize, then you don't come crying to us. you know, people that were trying to have a conversation that brings you on board so you chart a solution. Talk to Jim Sweeney at Operating Engineers 150. Talk to the trade unions about what they've had to do to maintain health insurance benefits and pension solvency from the Great Recession to present. How many times they had to reduce the multiplier. The conversations Jim Sweeney had to have with 7,000 operating engineers at a hall in Rosemont. You think those are easy conversations? 7,000 operating engineers? I don't think so. But at least he had the courage to do it because he had a fiduciary responsibility to his men and those families, and he did it. What we have is people who make empty promises because they know they'll be gone when it's time to pay the bills. And let me tell you something. I said this, I know I saw Dean Angelo in the crowd before. I said this, I got all kinds of heat from the Chicago FOP. We looked at the last 12 years of the FOPs, the police pension funds, Chicago police pension funds, filing with the Department of Insurance. I'm not making it these numbers. These are the numbers they file with the Department of Insurance. Doing a little back of the envelope math, which is all you really need to do, the Chicago Police Pension Fund, which is less than 25% funded, will be unable to pay out current beneficiaries by the end of 2021. And the Chicago firefighters is right behind them. And the Chicago teachers, which was 100% funded at the turn of the century, is now under 50% funded. And I could go on and on. You know where this goes. It goes to a dark place where people are going to get hurt. Because when every system in your state is a Ponzi scheme, every single system, and that's what Illinois is, what happens? What happens when Ponzi schemes are exposed? Has anybody seen the Bernie Madoff story? What happens is everybody gets hurt, and some people get hurt more than others. And that's what's going to happen if you don't take, we don't take evasive action at every level. If we don't level with people about where we truly stand, and by the way, we focus on Chicago, we focus on Illinois. There's a contagion at Backrack, who I think I saw in the audience. He'll tell you, there's a contagion of police and fire pension funds at the municipal level all over this state. Don't tell me you respect police officers and firefighters or teachers or state workers or municipal workers when you lie to them about how you are or are not providing for their retirement. They're holding up their end. We, as a political class, are not holding up our end. And they're the good guys? And the message to public sector unions, if you don't like being lied to, rank and file, because the leadership is just like the politicians. If you don't like being lied to, then tell the leadership of AFSCME and SEIU and the teachers unions to stop financing liars, because that's what they've been doing for 40 years.
Anybody unclear on that? Table 13, I think you were having some coffee or something. Okay. Dan, how's your, where's the helicopter right now? Is it coming in, or you got a second? All right. I'm going to try and get through some of these real quick. Sheila Weinberg, City Club member, head of Truth in Accounting, asks, she read the state Constitution one time. She saw a balanced budget requirement. Is that right? And then she looked in the newspaper and saw a $200 billion hole in our finances. And she wonders if you could square that for her.
Right. As I said, I believe in all the provisions of the state constitution, even the ones improperly interpreted by the Supreme Court. And that includes the primary funder of K-12 education. It also includes balanced budget that actually contemplates your obligations in real time, fiscal year over fiscal year, as opposed to what we do now, which is this, Enron accounting. In fact, our situation is more dire than Enron. We just have the power to tax. That's what salvages us for now. But it really is, it speaks to something that's a real problem in Illinois. And it's a problem kind of in our political culture locally, nationally, is that we're no longer, we no longer have a society where the rule of law is enforced. We have the rule of men and women. It says, well, why do we get to ignore that provision of the Constitution? Because Mike Madigan says so. John Cullerton says so. And Jim Durkin says so. And Bill Brady says so. And they all go along with it. That's why. Well, that's not a very good way to run or to organize a free society. In fact, that's one of the ways you turn a free society into not such a free society is you replace the rule of law with the rule of men and women. And that's what we're doing here. And we're doing it with the men and women of always. So there are elections in March of 2018, and there are elections in November of 2018. As I said before, if you think that it's been a long enough time with this experiment of Chicago Democrat dominance of state government, and oh, by the way, then there's another election in February of 2019, and the men and tiny dancers of always in city government, then there's an opportunity to do something different. And if you don't, but my state rep is so great. But I like it, we go to the PTA together. She's fun. He's great. We coached together on the football team. If you think that's the criteria to decide who should be representing your interests in Springfield, then we will continue to get the government we deserve. So I guess it's kind of up to all of us to decide what exactly the government we deserve looks like, because we're going to get it. And the question is, do we get it good and hard?
Do we think you should talk on the radio? Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Proft. Thank you. Hold on, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere.